So hello, and thank you all for joining us for this continuing education webinar. I'm Aziza Belcher-Platt, the Education and Training Representative for APA's Division 49. And on behalf of Division 49 CE Committee and all of Division 49, we welcome you to this webinar. It is my absolute honor to introduce Dr. Nicole Benedicto Elden. She is a 1.5 generation immigrant from the Philippines and identifies as Filipina American. She is the daughter of immigrants and has been a practicing clinical psychologist and life career coach for over 17 years. She has worked at universities, city and federal agencies, and community mental health centers in New York City. She currently has a private practice and counsels adults and couples with presenting concerns such as anxiety, depression, grief, life and career transitions, interracial relations, racial and cultural identity, immigrant issues, and intergenerational trauma. She also facilitates therapy, coaching, and supervision groups focused on the experiences of AAPI and multicultural communities. Dr. Benedicto Elden also teaches, trains, and supervises rising new clinicians, particularly clinicians of color. And she is also a published editor and author of a book on graduate student mental health, thriving in grad school. As part of and also consulting with the executive team, she has been in the forefront of confronting, advocating for, and directly addressing the DEI issues and concerns within institutions. As a result, she has been a mental health speaker and presenter for many corporations, higher education spaces, and community organizations. She is committed to advocating for mental health awareness, the destigmatization of therapy, and the incorporation of Eastern and collectivist interventions, especially when helping AAPI community members. So without further ado, I turn it over to Dr. Benedicto Elden.
Oh, thank you so much, Aziza. Thank you for that wonderful introduction. And I also just wanted to add one new thing, which is that I recently just joined the board for a wonderful organization in Westchester County that focuses on AAPI community, mental health, and wellness. And it's called Speak. So if you want to email me to learn more about it, or if you want to be involved, let me know. So I just wanted to share that new thing that just happened recently. Okay, so welcome to everybody here, everybody who's part of the AAPI community, and also those of you who are not part of the AAPI community but are supporting us today and watching. Thank you so much for coming. So the title of this workshop is Facilitating Asian Identity Groups, and the subheading is Nurturing the Individual Within the Collective, and the collective within the individual. And I really wanted to have that subheading because, I think it's important to know that it's not either or. It's not about the individual, the collective as if they're separate. It's really an interplay between those two because every individual is a social animal who wants to connect and attach and belong and is looking for community and is looking for a collective. And within every collective are individuals who are basically trying to figure out who they are within that collective and even outside of that collective. So it's really like an interplay between those two. So that's our title for today. So before we start, I just want to qualify that I'm going to be using terms and labels like AAPI, Asian, sometimes they're interchangeable. I'll move them around. And I'm going to use these terms and labels about various communities and identities. But please know that I am quite aware that these like terms and labels are really ever evolving and ever changing. And it is possible that I will miss the term or label that resonates the most with you. I want you to know that my intent is to always include you, even despite the fact that it might not always occur. Um, know also that some of what we discussed today may resonate with you, and some may not resonate with you. And this is absolutely okay. It just really exemplifies how complex we are as human beings. Finally, since some of what we do today is going to be more personal and maybe more experiential, we will have at least one breakout room. I ask that you check in with yourselves continually throughout this process. Check in with your body, with what your thoughts are, what you're feeling. Throughout this workshop. I want you to challenge yourself, but within your window of tolerance, and also take care of yourself in whatever way that means. So please keep yourself in mind. Okay, so I'm going to pull up my PowerPoint at this point. Hold on one moment. There. Okay, can everybody see that? Okay. All right. So, okay. I chose this picture. It's pictures of beautiful rocks because it reminds me a little bit of our community. Um, they're all rocks, but they're all different shapes, sizes, colors, textures, and it just reminds me of the diversity that's our community. Um, so long before the westernization of yoga and mindfulness, many Asian cultures already knew how our minds and our bodies are interconnected. So let's start today's workshop by honoring this fact. Let's move to our body, but rather than resisting or pushing down our bodily responses, let's sit with it and wonder instead, what is it communicating to me? Can I listen with an open heart to my body and ask it, what are you telling me? What do you need from me? So I'm going to do a guided meditation, one of my favorites. It's by Ruth King of the Mindful Race Institute, and it's called Remember That We Belong to Each Other. So let's begin by sitting comfortably. Either close your eyes if that makes you feel comfortable, or if you don't want to close your eyes, you might want to look at the rocks with soft eyes, and let's settle in. And notice your breath as it goes in and out, in and out. Notice what's happening inside you and also all around you. What's your experience like right now? Perhaps there's a sense of exuberance, or maybe you feel a sense of heat pulsing. And just allow the awareness to be there as you relax more into the body here and now. Breathe and relax into each exhale. Take your time to feel the release of the breath within the body. And connect with the stillness that surrounds you. Take your time here. And soften with the breath. Notice the movement of the breath in the stillness of the body. And repeat these two phrases silently to yourself. May we see the world with quiet eyes. May we remember that we belong not only to ourselves, but also to each other. Sit for a moment and dwell on this reality. If I didn't belong to you, I wouldn't be here. If you didn't belong to me, you wouldn't have come. My liberation is tied to your liberation. And your liberation is tied to my liberation. Your heart and my heart are very old friends. May we heal the seeds of separation inherited from our ancestors in gratitude for this life. And may our thoughts and actions be ceremonies of well-being in service to all of humanity. And as we close, let's return to the breath. And slowly open your eyes. I thank you for sharing this practice with me today. Let's take a moment to gather ourselves. How are you feeling? Maybe if you'd like, you could put in the chat one word of what you're feeling right now after this meditation. Michelle said calm, relaxed, calm, present. Yeah, I love this grounded. I love that. Yeah. Yes, I love to do meditations in the beginning of workshops and sometimes in the beginning of group to kind of help us arrive into the space. And I really invite you to incorporate body-oriented exercises during your identity groups, particularly because somatic symptoms are often a signal of psychological distress in many Asian cultures. Okay, so let's start our workshop. Let me share with you what we will be doing together today. We will first start by discussing in depth for a while the AAPI identity and the various ways that you and your clients may arrive into group work. Then we will do a breakout room and give you an opportunity to share about your own identity evolution with each other. And then I will follow this by sharing an example of a group issue that occurred during one of my Asian identity groups and how we work through it as a group. Intertwined will be AAPI specific issues such as intergenerational trauma and racial microaggressions. And I'll intertwine some reflection questions in there as well for all of you. Then we will finish by discussing AAPI cultural values and also US cultural values and how that might intertwine or conflict with each other. And time permitting, if there's time, we might do another breakout room, or we may simply do another set of reflection questions. And I want you to know that I will share the PowerPoint with you that I'm going to be showing you. And it includes references and resources in the end that include the mindfulness meditation that I just gave you from Ruth King. I also forgot to mention this. The mindfulness meditation that I gave you was, I really adapted it. I had to shorten it. I had to add a couple of things. I just want to let you guys know that it was an adapted version. And the one that I'm going to share with you is a longer version. Okay. So let's talk about the AAPI identity. Um, when we ask a person who they are, we are really asking them to share a very, very personal journey that encompasses their race, their ethnicity, their culture, their gender, their sexual identity, their socioeconomic status, their religious affiliations, and all the different roles that they inhabit in the world. So it's quite large. Each group member's most salient or important identity will be personally defined by them. However, when someone wishes to join an AAPI identity group, they're indicating that an important identity that they want to explore and process is their race, ethnicity, and culture. So today, in the interest of time, because we only have 1 hour, we will solely focus on these identities. I'm going to take the time and go slow in talking about identity. with the hope that it will give you a felt experience of the astounding complexity and diversity within our community. My hope is that as I share with you, that you will also check in with your own identity and its evolution, your identity experiences. And this is whether you are part of the AAPI community or not, because we all have our journeys. Why is this important? Well, because your identity and experience is how you enter the group space as a group facilitator. So if you do not explore and process these aspects of yourself, it will emerge anyway. And all those of us who have done groups, we know it'll emerge anyway in the countertransference. It's going to emerge in the enactments that happen in group, and sometimes even through the parallel processes that happen within group and outside of group. So if you're courageous enough to do this internal work, it will be easier for you to capture these moments, use the moments to more deeply understand each group member and the group as a whole. So that's why we're doing this. So I'm going to pull up my PowerPoint again. Hold on. Okay. So I'm going to share some facts with you. So did you know that Asia is the largest continent in the world and is composed of peoples from over 35 plus different countries? We are, in fact, a global majority, but we are not a monolithic group. In fact, we are more diverse than any other continent in the world. Some things to consider is that every Asian country has its own history, its own racial and ethnic makeup, its own cultural value, its own religious and spiritual belief, and adapted influences from other countries within Asia and other countries from other continents as well. And this could be through trade, business, colonization, war. Again, this just exemplifies the vast and diverse experiences within each and every Asian group member you will meet. And sometimes they're not even aware of how complex their identity is, and they're going to find out as they process it through group. So that happens often, by the way. So how do AAPIs in the United States identify themselves? How will they come to you? Well, a few ways, and we're going to talk about them. Oh, I'm sorry. Actually, let me give you this other fact. This is also important. Did you know that by 2055, AAPIs in the US will surpass Latinx and Hispanic populations to be the largest minority group in the United States? Even if you've never worked with an AAPI client, you will eventually do so, and you will do so often. Okay, so then let's move to the AAPI identity. How do they identify themselves? So a common way that Asians can identify themselves between themselves, other than by country, is by the region of their birth or their heritage. So I'm gonna share with you the different regions. So if somebody says they're East Asian, they may come from countries such as China, Mongolia, North and South Korea, Japan, Hong Kong, Taiwan, Macau. And these are just some of the countries. I can't mention all of them because there's too many. They might also be from Southeast Asia. This might mean that they come from countries such as Cambodia, Indonesia, Laos, Malaysia, Myanmar, Singapore, Thailand, the Philippines, Timor, Vietnam. Or they may come from South Asia, and that means that they might come from countries such as India, Bangladesh, Bhutan, Maldives, Nepal, Pakistan, Sri Lanka, Afghanistan. And then they may also come from Central or West Asia, otherwise known as some parts of the Middle East is part of Asia. So this could be countries such as Georgia, Armenia, Azerbaijan, Cyprus, Turkey, Lebanon, Israel, Palestine, Jordan, Iraq, Yemen, Kuwait, Bahrain, Qatar, Saudi Arabia. Or they could be from North Asia. North Asia is actually part of Russia. It's a part of Russia. There's smaller population, but Siberia is part of North Asia. And then we have the Pacific Islanders, which include islands such as Melanesia, Micronesia, and Polynesia. And islands that belong to these areas are Palau, Tonga, Vanuatu, Fiji, Mariana, and Marshall Islands. And did you know that many native Hawaiians also consider themselves Pacific Islanders? So sharing this is not meant to overwhelm you or me for that matter, but instead to help us stay humble so we can enter the group experience with humility. If we enter in with humility, we can remain curious, we can remain open as group facilitators. We can be aware of what we know, but also of the vastness of what we don't know and what we can't possibly know, you know? A second way that people may identify themselves is by incorporating their American identity. So they could call themselves Pakistani American, Taiwanese American. Sometimes people flip this and they say, like, I'm American Japanese if they feel like their American identity is sort of like more prominent to them than their Asian identity. And then the third one, I'm going to talk a little bit about nativity. That's where somebody was born or when somebody immigrated. And it's important because the United States is a country of immigrants. The majority of us, I mean, all of us are immigrants to this country, except for the Native Americans who were the first ones here. Um, so I'm going to spend some time with this. So there's the first generation immigrants. These are the first in their family to immigrate to the United States, and they come here as adults. They may often, but not always, maintain closer connections to their Asian country and Asian identity. And this is especially true if they still have Asian family and friends in their Asian country that they connect with. For first generation immigrants, the act of assimilating or taking in and valuing US culture versus asserting their Asian identity and Asian culture can be more confusing because the act of immigration in itself requires adapting to US culture. So it could be a more sort of, confusing part of who they are. They may also generally have less knowledge of US history because they do come here as adults. And sometimes they may appear more detached and less emotionally connected to aspects of US culture, such as social issues or politics. And oftentimes, when I've had clients who fall into this category, the reason they give for that is that there's so many things that they have to acclimate and adapt to in the immigration process that some things have to, for them, fall kind of secondary as opposed to primary. And then we have the 1.5 generation immigrants. I consider myself a 1.5 generation immigrant. Often they come to the US with their parents and they arrive before the age of 16 years old. This is a significant difference than first generation immigrants because 1.5 generation immigrants had part of their upbringing and education in both cultures. Again, they may maintain closer connection with their Asian country and Asian identity, especially if they arrived here older. But they also tend to be more connected than first gens to the US culture. Um, so they have more knowledge of US history because they were educated here. And they've all, not everybody, but a lot of them have told me experiences of just feeling sometimes marginalized, not totally fitting into either culture. And then we have the second generation, third generation. These are um, those who had parents or grandparents who were immigrants, but they themselves were born and raised in the United States. Often, but not always, they're more connected to their American identity. However, a very common experience that's been shared by so many is the idea that even though they feel more connected to their American identity, they get messages from outside, from others that they don't quite belong. For example, asking them, "Where are you really from?" So they feel like almost like an eternal foreigner. They also have shared a lot of like more varied sort of identity stages, such as marginalization, which I just shared before, the idea of like not feeling like you fit into either culture. Sometimes they can feel more separated, which means that they may be more connected to, like, let's say, their Asian culture than being American. And then there's always this constant process of trying to integrate these different parts of their identity, trying to integrate it together, and this is called enculturation. They're more likely to identify and voice childhood and adolescent racial identity conflicts, and also be able to name racial discrimination and racial micro and macroaggression experiences. Overall, they just have an increased awareness and attunement to these experiences. And I just want to stop and just like ask you this question. Can you already sense the intergenerational conflicts that can occur here? If you have a first generation parent and a second generation child, and how their needs may conflict with each other. Okay. And then there's the international students and workers who are often more connected to their country of origin. Again, not always, but more often, especially if they're transient, like if they're just coming here for a certain period of time, but planning on returning to their Asian country. A lot of them will say, I don't really feel like this is really my country, so they don't get as involved. They may know less about U.S. history and culture, and they may express more confusion and withdrawal when socio-political issues arise. Yeah. It's a different experience for those who are international students and workers who plan to live here. That's a different experience. Okay. And then a fourth way that they may come to you and identify is through their more complex identities. So multiracial identity, transnational identity, third culture identity. And the definition for this is basically the mixed identity that a child or adult assumes, influenced both by their parents' cultures and the culture in which they are raised. An example of this are those who are biracial or multiracial. Maybe an example of a third culture person. I had a client who basically was born in Asia, but went to boarding school for elementary school and high school in the UK, and then came to the United States and did their undergrad and graduate education in the United States, and then lived in Canada and worked in Canada. So they considered themselves third culture. And then I had another client who considered himself transnational, and this is because he came from a military family and he literally lived in like 7 different countries in like all the continents. Um, and he considered himself transnational. And then we have those who just consider themselves Americans. So these are individuals who may have an AAPI heritage. They may even be born in an AAPI country, but embrace American identity primarily. So you could say that they're more like fully assimilated into their American identity. And I wanted to like do a little detour and just ask you like a quiet reflection example. I wanted to, just share something. I had a student who stated one time to me, this was a 1.5 generation student who said, I am American, even though I was born in the Asian country that they were born in and raised there, I consider myself 100% American. And I just wanted to ask you to reflect, maybe silently to yourself, what your thoughts and feelings are if in hearing this. What are you thinking? What are you feeling about this person who says this in that way? I'll just give you a few seconds to think about it. And I just want to share an additional information about this person. This person had basically shared that when they were growing up in their Asian country, that a primary identity, more than race, ethnicity, and culture that they had was that they considered themselves gay and Muslim. And their Asian country, they experienced a lot of homophobia and religious persecution. And I want you to maybe silently reflect to yourself again, did your feelings and thoughts about this person change with this additional information? How did it change? How did it not change? Yeah. Just like thinking about that a bit. Okay, thank you for taking that little detour with me. Um, okay, so a sixth way that somebody may come to you and identify themselves is through their generational status. And this is so common these days. It wasn't as common like many, many years ago, but so common these days. And what's interesting about this is you're incorporating what is occurring and the belief systems in the United States culture at either the time that you immigrated or at the time of your childhood and adolescence. So this is when people say, I'm a boomer, I'm a Gen X, I'm a millennial, I'm a Gen Z, I'm a Gen Alpha. So these are different ways that people come to you. Let's take a breath because I gave you a whole bunch of information there. It's like it was a lot, you know? So let's take a pause and maybe take a breath. And I want you to check in with your body, maybe check in with your thoughts and your emotions. And we're going to do a little breakout room. And this is to prompt questions that I want you to do in your breakout room. I think it's going to be like maybe two people each breakout room. So I want you to share about your identity and how it has evolved through the years. If you're uncomfortable doing this, you can talk about a client maybe that you want to talk about and talk about their evolving identity, whatever feels comfortable for you. But then I want you to think about, what did it feel like to think about identity? How did your body feel? What feelings came up for you? What was the most challenging part of sharing it with this other person? What was the most comfortable part? And how might this experience be important for you as a group facilitator? And I'm going to actually ask Aziza to help me with this. And I'm going to put this, oops. I think, Aziza, are you gonna give them the prompt questions
Yeah,
as
they're
part
in
of
the
breakout?
chat now, and then I
Oh,
will broadcast them when we get into the breakout rooms.
okay, wonderful. So we're going to do a 10-minute breakout room, so maybe 12:42. So perhaps you'll have around like 3 minutes to just discuss together. If you want to talk more, please do it, and then you'll get an opportunity to get to know each other a little bit. So enjoy the breakout room, and I'll see you guys in 10 minutes. Thank you, Aziza.
No problem. I'm just going to put broadcast the questions and um, okay.
Okay, so I'll be right back. I'm going to put my picture on.
Okay.
Here you go. An example. Yeah. I'm going to move now to talk about an example of a conflict that happened in an AAPI group that I was leading. And there's going to be specific issues. I'm going to share this with you that um, it's going to be touched on. So it's going to be, I'm going to talk a little bit about the model minority myth. And this is the myth that Asian Americans and Pacific Islanders are the most similar to European Americans and thus are viewed as models for and or better than other ethnic minority groups. They are the model because they have succeeded or made it, and usually this means academically or financially, and they've reached the American dream, and this is the other part about it, and they've all done it. They've assimilated all without complaining. So this is like that myth. And then basically there's the racial microaggressions. These are everyday slights, insults, put downs, invalidations, and offensive behaviors that people of color experience in daily interactions, with sometimes well-intentioned others who may be unaware that they have engaged in racially demeaning ways towards a target group. Macroaggressions are more overt racist and discriminatory experiences. So they're the ones that you see and feel, and it feels you're sure about them. Racial microaggressions can make people feel all kinds of negative ways, but also not necessarily be able to pinpoint what's going on. It's a more confusing experience. And then intergenerational trauma, the passing down of trauma from one generation to the next, which can affect people's emotional and mental health, and this can affect people's emotional mental health in conscious ways, but then also sometimes very unconscious ways that get passed on. And what kind of traumas are we talking about? Maybe refugee trauma, maybe a trauma of living in poverty, maybe a trauma of living in different types of governments, such as authoritarian governments, maybe misogyny, racism, homophobia, transphobia, religious persecution. So these are types of intergenerational traumas that can get passed on. Okay, and I'm going to leave this here so that as I'm speaking and sharing about this example of this group, and if I mention these things, you'll have the definition handy. Okay, so I'm going to be talking about an AAPI identity group many, many, many years ago that I had. Um, I am going to be changing many details, a lot of details, including the names. The names are all fake. And I'm going to do this for confidentiality purposes. But please know also that the way that I handled what happened in this group and the way that the group went about it may be different than how you might handle it. And this is because we're always considering different things, different factors that might be going on. For example, you have to think about what kind of group you're running, the purpose of the group, what developmental phase you are in the group, the composition of the group, and also how much safety you've established in your group before you delve into some of these things. Um, okay, so this group that I had was a support process group. It had been meeting once a week for 6 months. It was virtual. We had established a lot of trust and safety, and there was a lot of sort of sharing of like difficulties experiencing socially, interpersonally, outside in their life, with their families. And we were kind of in the stage one forming group and entering into the stage two of the storming process. Um, so while we were discussing racial discrimination issues in this group generally, and the model minority myth specifically, Annie, who was a 1.5 generation AAPI group member, she was a little older than the rest of the group members. She belonged to Generation X. She was expressing her opinions to the group on these issues. And she was using statements that included, what's the big deal? It's not as bad as all that. Life is hard enough. Why focus so much on things you can't change? There's more important issues. And there was a felt feeling in the group that the message was, let's not talk about this anymore. Let's all just get over it. That was the feeling of the group. And then there was Shiyun, who was a second generation AAPI group member. She was younger. She was from the millennial generation. And she was very, very upset. And she used the word, I'm really triggered. She was really triggered by Annie. And she expressed that she felt that Annie was insensitive and minimizing. And they really went at it at the group. And at one point, she basically was saying that she felt Annie was uneducated and racist. And that led to a very intense conflict. While at the same time, she was also defending that discrimination is real. They were both very angry and disdainful in the way that they were engaging with each other because they were both triggered by each other. And and the others in the group, it was a mix of like some international students and workers, and then there was like some second generation members as well, were mostly silent and just uncomfortable during this setting. So I just want to pause for a second and have you reflect silently. What would you be feeling and thinking at this point with this happening? What would you be pulled to do? Or how would you be pulled to act? I will share with you what was going on with me at this point. So I was a little blindsided by this, even though I was waiting for the storming to come. I was a little blindsided because the previous session had been so much love and so much support and so much effusiveness, and I could feel myself becoming very uncomfortable. And I got a little panicky. I could like my heart was beating fast. I was like, "Oh my goodness, what is going on here?" Because I had thought about how this reaction is very common for me, I was able to connect it to the fact that it really comes from my own cultural value as a Filipino American. We have a cultural value of collectivism, and we have this term called pakikisama. Pakikisama is a Tagalog word that means, you know, getting along with everybody, keeping the harmony, don't rock the boat. And I already knew that I had this cultural value infused in me. So anytime conflict happens, I always tend to get a little anxious and nervous about it. And so I was definitely saying, oh, I'm having my cultural, my cultural value of collectivism is happening in this very moment. The other thing is I was having some countertransferential reactions because I had been having my own difficult conversations about these very same issues with various family members that very same week. And I was finding myself allying with one member over the other. And I was very conscious that this was happening. So I was really going like, oh no. Um, so I allowed it to go on for a while because I wanted to also give them an opportunity to really hear what each of them were trying to communicate. But truthfully, I also did not want to react impulsively, from my default place of anxiety. And I also was trying to calm myself down, truthfully. That was also part of the process that I was having. Um, and I wanted to also remind myself, I literally was doing this cognitively. I kept reminding myself what my goal is as a facilitator, my own goal as a facilitator. My goal was that I wanted to allow each person to have space in group to share even difficult feelings and thoughts and beliefs and get feedback from others. I also wanted to embody my belief really that conflict could be an opportunity for opening conversation and deeper understanding rather than shutting it down. And I also knew that part of me wanted to help the group to slow down so that we can identify the emotions, what's going on in people's bodies, what people are thinking. And in order for us to understand that this is a communication that's important and that it really leads to a lot of deep-seated and complex experiences that we want to explore, and also that it might lead to primary emotions, not only from what's going on today, but also potentially from what's going on societally, but also what happened in the past. So I kept like reminding myself, keep to the goal of the group, keep to the goal of the group. So after a while, people stopped speaking, and it was just silence. So I identified the silence and the discomfort in the room. I said, we're all very silent right now. I can see people look like they're uncomfortable. Are you uncomfortable? People were like, yes, they're very uncomfortable. And I basically said, the world has entered into our group because these were discussions we were talking about externally and it had entered into our group space. And everybody was just sharing how uncomfortable they were at that moment. So we said, what should we do? So we decided to do a mindfulness meditation, actually. And we wanted to just like focus on the body. So we did that. We did the mindfulness, and then we basically each talked about what parts of our body was uncomfortable, which part of our body was feeling calm, and then also the uncomfortable parts of our body, what kind of emotions may be embedded in there, you know? So we talked about that for a bit. And people shared their discomfort feelings. And more importantly, we discussed the fear of this moment in group. What are we afraid is going to happen in group right now? And people shared it's going to ruin our safety. People say we're going to be stuck in this moment. We're not going to be able to get through it. And then some people were like, I don't like sitting in the anger and the conflict. I'm feeling so uncomfortable about it. And so I disclosed that I asserted my belief that each person here has a perspective and experience that is worth knowing. And then we talked together about how will we each convey if our emotional system is overloaded? How are we going to address this as a group? How can we make space for each other? How can we find a way to listen to each other right now? What do we have to do? So we made a plan, and basically what the plan was that we were going to give each person a space to share what happened to them during this. Um, so we talked about also, you know, deep breathing exercises and mindfulness breaks. Like anybody could just say, we need to do a deep breathing. We need to do a mindfulness if people were really like, heightened. And we also talked about how do we embody empathy and grace? No, even if we're hearing things that are very upsetting, knowing that we will have our own chance to speak. How do we do that? And then people also just talked about that some of them may turn off the camera if they get too heightened. If people walked away, we said, just let us know you're walking away so that when you come back, we can check in with you. So we made a plan together before we delved into the conversation. And the first person we gave space to was Shiyun, basically, to share her what she called triggered reaction. And at first, she shared about her social and political views on racism and discrimination. It was very intellectual, it was very up here. But I also said, I know that all of us are feeling a lot right now, so this is clearly personal for all of us. Would you be willing to share the personal part of this? And she was able to share her history of childhood racial trauma, some pretty intense bullying experiences, and a lot of racial aggressions that she had experienced. And she talked about how just these conversations in general elicits a very visceral reaction to her. It's like a body reaction. It's basically her body has almost like a panicky feel, PTSD kind of feel, um, and her emotions get really, really heightened. And she shared feeling marginalized in childhood, like that she was basically told she was too Asian to be American, a true American. She was also didn't speak the Asian language, so even when she was at home, sometimes with her own family and her own Asian culture, she felt marginalized from them. And she also talked about how the model minority myth led to her feeling silenced, alone, invisible, and minimized by her family, her classmates, and even her US culture. And she said that because she expressed some of these things to her parents, she was seen as a troublemaker and was scapegoated for voicing some of these issues. And I really made a point at this point to reinforce her courage in sharing this because I was thinking she might be thinking that she's going to have this role in the group now too. We're going to see her as the troublemaker, as a scapegoat. And then she shared something also very, very interesting, which is she said shared a history of her grandparents as political dissidents in her Asian country. And she, although she didn't really have a connection with them, she didn't know them. She said, I am like them. She just knew of them. And then she shared that her mother had actually felt quite traumatized by her parents' political activism. And she had felt largely neglected by her parents. Her parents were incarcerated at some point, so she felt abandoned by her parents. And the family also was socially ostracized. And basically, Shiyun's mom felt her parents were wrong in choosing activism over family. And so the way that Shiyun's mom dealt with it is she cut off her parents when she got older. And then she coped with this by not valuing social issues at all and instead over-focused on family goals. So the message she gave to Shiyun was put your head down, work hard, just fit in and succeed and live your life. And as you can say, like that's very common to the model minority myth. It's very, kind of like comes together. And of course, it also fits in a little bit with an immigrant mentality. Um, and they were also reinforced for it because as her parents did that, they actually did prosper in the United States when they moved here. However, because this is what we call an intergenerational trauma, what also happened is Shiyun's mom actually then ended up neglecting Shiyun's emotional needs. And Shiyun largely felt abandoned by her mother when she was expressing a lot of like these traumas that she was experiencing. And she felt a lack of protection. So there was like really like an intergenerational thing that was being experienced here. And then Shiyun was able to connect that Annie's way of speaking, the words that she was using, how minimizing her comments sounded, reflected her mom's own coldness and dismissiveness. And that this transference really was part of her reaction. So I'm going to stop for a second. I'm realizing that we're actually like 1 o'clock right now, and I hope that you guys can stay just a little bit, but if not, I will send you this PowerPoint. But let's just stop right now and just check in. And I want to ask you, do you identify with Shiyun? And this is, you can answer in your own head. Why and why not? How do you identify with her? How don't you identify with her? And how might you be pulled to act as a result in group? Okay. Aziza, is it okay if we go for a little bit longer? Yeah, okay.
Sure.
And then basically from there, we gave Annie space to share. And she really started out by apologizing to Shiyun, and we went slow with that one. People like run through that, but that is so important. That is the repair. So we really extended that and made it go a little like longer. And then basically Annie shared that race discussions also it was very triggering for her because she also has had conflict with some family members and also some friends that she's had. And she tends to become very defensive during those times. And then she basically started to talk about her intent, like she didn't intend to hurt Shiyun. But then it starts to feel a little bit like I didn't intend it, so I'm sorry you took it that way. It starts to feel that way. So I had to pause in that moment and also do a little psycho-ed about the fact that intent is important. But what's also important is fostering accountability for actions, meaning you can have a positive intent, but you've also hurt somebody. And how can you hold this dialectic together at the same time? Um, Then she shared also, truthfully, a very similar childhood experience of like bullying and unfair treatment. But the interesting thing about it is that as she was sharing it, she realized that she didn't usually share it with anybody. And the group was basically saying, well, that's actually a microaggression, you know, that's actually a macroaggression, you know, that's a result of the model minority myth. So for the first time, she was having words attached to experiences that she wasn't allowed to actually share. Um, she also shared that basically in the 1990s, when she was growing up, the message from the culture was adapting as being strong, embrace being American, you're lucky to be here, don't complain. Again, very similar to the model minority myth. And she was able, as a result of this, because the group was very supporting and loving towards her and encouraging, she was able to like remember actually that she felt pretty sad and angry during that time, and she was not allowed to do it. So she had to swallow it and repress it. And she realized she had no allies, no supports, and actually there was no language even to give her a frame for what she was experiencing. And so we talked about the fact that she had no choice but to repress and minimize at that time, but maybe she doesn't have to do it now. And she talked about the pros and cons of repressing because there's always pros and cons to repressing, always. So you always have to give space for both. Um, And basically, one of the things she realized is that when other people express something that she has been repressing, she tends to become very, very anxious about it and wants to shut down the conversation. And other people in the group said, "Oh, I've felt the same way," you know. So everybody was really commiserating about that. So I just want to check in with you guys also. Do you identify with Annie? How do you identify with her? How don't you identify with her? How might you be pulled to act a result as a result in as a group facilitator? Okay. And then we talked to the silent ones in the group, who shared their discomfort at the conflict, how they may tend to feel and react to these intense conversations. Some international students talked about being confused. They said, I don't understand American history. I don't understand about this racism, and I feel like I have nothing to contribute, so I tend to be silent. And then some people talked about collectivism and how it leads to discomfort with conflict and withdrawal. And then some people talked about anger, how people felt about anger and how they, experienced anger in childhood. And it was actually arranged. Some people had a very violent childhood, so they tend to recoil when anger comes into the room. And then some people actually had no expressions of feeling in their childhood with their family, so they didn't even know how to really handle it. And so they might actually withdraw. And then also there was just a fear of taking sides because there were people here who had family roles where they were mediators. So they didn't want to take side one or the other, but then that also renders them oftentimes quite silent. Okay. Do you identify with the silent members? How do you identify? How don't you identify? How might you be pulled to act in group as a result, as a facilitator? Okay, well, thank you for like joining me with that example. I want you to know that that wasn't one group. It wasn't one session. It was 2 to 3 months, really extended, of us being able to work through all these different things and to make plans. So it didn't happen in one session, even though I kind of consolidated it together. Um, yeah, so does anybody have any thoughts or feelings or questions about that example, or even feedback about that example? So we're about to end, and I'm going to just give you um, talk about finally just AAPI cultural values. These are some of the cultural values that AAPI communities hold, not all of them, but many of them. And some of these cultural values can kind of conflict with US cultural values. Some of them kind of like can actually work together. But for example, collectivism, placing the needs of the group over the needs of oneself, can conflict with the cultural value, US cultural value of individualism. Emotional self-control, having the ability to control emotions and resolve emotional problems, can conflict with the US cultural value of emotional expressiveness. Humility or saving face, being humble, modest, careful of not shaming yourself and your family, can conflict with the US cultural value of assertiveness and expressiveness. Family recognition through achievement, achieving academically and avoiding occupational and educational failure, can conflict with the American value of pursuit of happiness, which might not be through education or jobs, although it kind of coincides a little bit with the US cultural value of capitalism. So it's not always straightforward, right? Because it's kind of like a complex thing. And then conformity to norms, not deviating from familial and social norms, can conflict with the US cultural value of standing out and uniqueness and even fighting for your rights. And filial piety, respect for elders, can conflict with the American cultural value where we're obsessed with youth. And then spiritual, religious, and ancestral cultural values, healing through the family and community and the gods, can conflict with the US cultural value of healing through the self, through medicine and through therapy. And then the body focus, healing through the body and thoughts rather than emotions, can conflict with our cultural value of healing through emotions and relationships. And we don't have enough time to do this, but here are some thought reflection questions that I hope that you will do at home. What cultural values resonate the most with you? What cultural values resonate the least with you? How might this challenge you as a group facilitator and as a group member? And we are going to end with this. And I just want to say, breathe in with gratitude for our community today. I'm so grateful you shared your time with me. Maraming salamat, which means thank you very much in Tagalog. And I am going to give you this PowerPoint. It has my email. If you have more questions that I didn't get to answer, please write me an email, let me know. And I'm also going to give you the resources. That's the next page right here, the resources as well. And thank you. Thank you for being here today. I appreciate you all.
Thank you so much, Dr. Benedicto Elden. If you can unmute or if you can use reactions to please show our appreciation to Dr. Elden for this amazing webinar and these resources. On behalf of Division 49, thank you all again for attending this live or watching this recording. And for those interested in CE credit, you will receive an email with a link to the post-webinar assessment and evaluation. And we are really so grateful that you all joined us and to have had all of this beautiful information today. So have a great rest of your day.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye.